Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation of Your Space. We have a FamilySpace session tonight, and we're very excited that we have Danielle Law from the Child and Adolescent Research and Education, also known as the CARE Lab at Wilfrid Laurier Brantford campus. And we have Van and Laurel from the City of Hamilton's Child and Adolescent Services, which is part of the Public Health Services Department. And we're really excited to have them sharing research and strategies and other helpful things about cyberbullying and the internet and how our kids are using it and how we can support them in maintaining healthy balance. And so it's very wonderful to have everyone with us tonight. And I'm going to hand things over to our presenters. And please feel free to ask questions throughout and post them. And we'll respond to them as we go.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Van and Laurel and I are very excited to share some of our experiences and some of our research findings with you. I'm going to start off the presentation. I'm Danielle Law from Wilfrid Laurier, and my research is on cyberbullying and responsible internet use. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of our findings. So just as I'm going through the presentation, I thought I would pose a question just to get to know a little bit about what some of your concerns might be. So if at any time during our presentation you want to share some of your concerns about your children or teens' internet use, you can feel free to pose any of those questions and we'll answer them along the way. So, as you know, children develop and they are growing in our world. But something that we need to remember is that children are not growing in isolation. They are actually growing in relationship to their family, their peers, their community, their school, and also in the world of the internet. So one of the things that we want to really emphasize is that we're all working together when we think about child development and when we think about how we want to help them to grow to be responsible community members. So as they're developing and interacting with the world, the internet is something that they are exposed to from a very, very young age. Research has shown that 42% of children between birth to 4 years have access to their own smartphone or to a smartphone. 41% of 5 to 9-year-olds have access to a smartphone. 55% of 10 to 13-year-olds have access to their own smartphone, and 77% of 14 to 15 years have access to a smartphone. And this just goes up from there to 94% after 15 years of age. But how young people are using the internet and these devices differs according to age. So when it comes to very young children, so between birth to 4 years, although research is focusing more from between age 2 to 4, kids are not too interested in socializing online. They're interested in watching Paw Patrol or cartoons on YouTube or playing various types of educational games. By the time they hit their tween years, so that's around age 10 to 12, some difficulties. We just skipped a little bit forward just so that we could look at this the data a little bit more closely in larger font. So going back to tweens, tweens are focused on quantity over quality of friendships. So they're really looking at how many friends they have, how many likes they're getting, and really focusing on the number of followers they have. So this is extremely important to build their social status and their social capital in school and online. So when it comes to teenagers, they are focused primarily on quality of friendship, and this is extremely important to them. So they're not so much looking at number of friends, but at the quality of friendships they can form and how intimate they can get online. So a lot of times they're starting their dating relationships, they're starting to voice interest in other people romantically in this way. So they're really trying to engage in a deeper, more meaningful friendship, and they find this easier to do online. So one of the big things that oftentimes we are concerned about with our young people focusing so much of their time looking at screens is screen time and what is appropriate. So one of the biggest predictors of children's screen time is actually parents' screen time. So parents who spend a lot of time looking at their own screens are more likely to have children who will also spend a lot of time looking at screens. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends less than 2 hours a day for children between the ages of 2 to 5, just because there's so much going on developmentally, cognitively, emotionally, and just physically with their eyesight that they're recommending less than 2 hours a day for these children. Screen time, however, is a lot more difficult to measure for older children and teens because it's in their pocket all the time. So more research is really required in this area to really figure out the nuances of how much time they're actually spending. So what exactly is going on online? Among 13 to 17-year-olds, 95% have their own or access to a cell phone. And they're using things like YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, and they're tending to use YouTube and Snapchat the most. So a lot of them are using or have access to their own phone, and they're using it a lot for these social media type things and YouTube. So some of the questions that are coming up now about screen time is whether all screen time is bad in some way, regardless of what they're doing. So this question actually, it requires more research, but typically if students are using screens for homework, and this is relating more to older children and youth, it's not bad to be looking at the screen when it comes to homework, but it is recommended that after every 20 to 30 minutes or so, people take a break to kind of rest their eyes. We do know that a lot of screen time affects our sleep, so we want to make sure before bed that we're not exposing ourselves to that blue light. So even like an hour before bed that we reduce looking at screens. But I mean, screens are a part of our life, so it's hard to say, no, we should not be on screens for the number of hours that we are on them, but we do know that you should take some breaks after maybe 30 minutes. And doing schoolwork and things like that, it's more, that's going to affect more of their social development and cognitive development, and less so about what's going on physically. So a lot of what they're doing when it comes to these social media sites is they're interacting with their friends. So the data shows that teens who use the internet almost constantly are as likely to socialize with their friends offline as their peers who are online less frequently. So what we're finding is that among those who are online, so we're looking at the left side now, in person, among those who go online, 24% are almost constantly, still feel like they're almost constantly interacting with their friends, and 23% of those a little bit less often. And so you can kind of see the differences here. So even here for the percent of teens who say they get together with their friends on a daily basis, even for 1 to 2 days a week, it's like 22 to 26% in the 2 to 4 day a week range, and then still 23% for like almost every day. And for those who are online, among those who are online, even 69% are saying that they're still getting together with their friends almost a little bit less often. And 75% are saying that they still get together with their friends every day. These numbers I do want to take with a grain of salt, though, because what does it mean when people are getting together, and what are they doing even though they're getting together? So oftentimes they may be getting together in person, but they're still looking at their phone and looking at screens together. So we just want to be careful about that. So of the constantly online teens, they're more likely to report both positive and negative experiences when they're interacting with social media. So some of the positive feelings are feeling connected to what's going on in their friends' lives. They like to have a place where they can show their creative side. They like that they can have people who can support them in tough times, and they can also be more in touch with their friends' feelings. So for both teens and adults, social media and the internet helps to maintain strong social ties, keep in touch with friends on a daily basis, form closer interpersonal relationships, and receive support from others. And all of these are really important for fostering feelings of belonging, social skills, sense of self and identity. They have an opportunity now to explore questions that they might have in different forms of self. And so these are all really healthy for both teens and adults. But at the same time, constantly online teens are also more likely to report negative feelings. And some of these negative feelings include pressure to only post content that makes them look good to others. They sometimes feel overwhelmed because there's a lot of drama that happens online. There's pressure to post content that will get lots of comments and likes. And sometimes they also feel worse about their own life. So all of these reasons make sense and are perfectly normal even before the internet existed. There was always a lot of drama during adolescence. There's always pressure to say the right thing and to look good. So all of these things are normal. But the big question is, when do these negative feelings become problematic? So these things become problematic when, for example, pressure to post content that makes them look good or pressure to post content that will get comments and likes becomes a problem when teens are depending on these things to make themselves feel better. Or they're basing these comments on their self-esteem or on positive reinforcement from other people, or they're already sensitive to mental health concerns such as anxiety and depression. So it's not to say that being on social media and posting pictures and feeling pressure to post is bad in and of itself, but it just becomes problematic if they're depending on these things for their sense of self and for their self-esteem. So if we think about the child who is growing up, and this child might already be sensitive to mental health concerns, this child might decide to post something online to get a desired response. And so they might take a selfie of themselves or post a meme that they think will get a lot of positive response. And so when they post this thing, they might actually get the response that they desire. So they'll get a lot of likes, they'll get a lot of positive comments, and so they feel really good about themselves and about what they posted, and that's just positive reinforcement to make them post even more. But sometimes they post to get a desired response, but then they don't get the response they wanted. So they might post a selfie or they might post a comment or a message, and they get a lot of negative comments and a lot of negative feedback. And so if they're already sensitive to mental health concerns, or they're going on to and posting these things because they want to feel better about themselves, this goes counter to what they expected. They feel badly about themselves, but instead of stopping, they post again. So they take down the thing that they didn't like, and they start posting things that they'll post again, something that they think other people will like. And so it just becomes a cyclical effect of no matter what response they're getting, they're going to continue to post. So it's not so much that people and our children are posting things. We have to be more aware of why they're posting things. So not that they're posting, but why are they posting? And so this is something that we really need to be more aware of when we're thinking about our children and why they might be doing certain things and what might be contributing to their behavior. So when we look back at the negative feelings, one of the other comments that they said was that they felt pressure and overwhelmed because of drama. So being overwhelmed because of drama is natural. This is something that has happened before the internet. But being overwhelmed because of drama becomes a problem when drama turns into bullying and when it turns into bullying online or offline. So either way, drama itself is not the problem. It's when it turns into bullying, which is comprised of 4 components. If the act is intentionally aggressive, if it is carried out repeatedly, if there's an imbalance of power, so if one person is bigger or louder or stronger than the other person, more popular than the other person, and it occurs through electronic technology. So when it comes to cyberbullying, boys were found to be significantly more likely than girls to experience electronic bullying. And boys were also significantly more likely than girls to say they had electronically bullied. We need to take these figures with a little bit of a grain of salt as well, because boys are also socialized to boast about these kinds of things. And so their numbers may be a bit inflated because they may think it's more manly, or they're following that stereotypical boy role by saying that they're more aggressive and stronger. 42% of youth experienced electronic bullying at least once in the previous 4 weeks, and 60% of youth witnessed electronic bullying in the previous 4 weeks. So we're seeing a lot of people witnessing electronic bullying. Older youth were significantly more likely than younger youth to experience electronic bullying, and this is mostly because older youth have more access to technology. So when it comes to intervening, 71% of those who saw electronic bullying did something to help at least once. And that is extremely comforting, actually, because this number used to be much, much lower. Youth are very protective of their family. They're more likely to intervene if it's a family member or a close friend or a dating partner. And then it's still pretty high for somebody at school, and 37% for a stranger. So it's these figures are pretty good to hear. So I'm glad that we're making progress in this area, and it means that we're doing something right and helping them to feel a bit more comfortable to intervene. Some of the motivations and barriers for intervening include, when it comes to likelihood of intervening, is if the electronic bullying was clearly wrong, and if they knew that intervening would make a difference, and if they could intervene anonymously. So one of the biggest barriers is if they're found out. Oftentimes people who intervene are afraid that they will then become the next target. So if they can say something anonymously, this is the best way for them to share what happened. Some of the worries that youth have for intervening is that they're worried that they will themselves become a target, or that they will make something worse for the target. So one of the questions that someone has is whether other kids are more likely to join in on bullying online than in person. It's way easier for people to join in online, definitely. And so you do see a lot more comments happening when it comes to online bullying. But one of the good things is that we're finding that if people step up and say, stop doing this, more people will also say, stop doing this. So it goes both ways. It might be hard or it might be tempting to say something negative, but if we can teach kids to also feel comfortable to stand up to a bullying situation, this can also help decrease it or stop it. So when it comes to adults, youth are not fully convinced that adults will be helpful. 33% of youth do not intervene because they think adults do not give advice that helps. And 43% of youth agree that talking to parents and teachers will not change anything. And we've seen this before. I think oftentimes adults are not sure what to do, and they might procrastinate in thinking about how to do it. And so nothing helpful actually happens. And this is problematic when youth have risked being a target themselves and put themselves out there to share what's going on, but then nothing happens. So we really, as adults, need to step up when it comes to that. That being said, the second and third top rated intervention strategies involved talking to adults. So 74% did tell a trusted adult, and 73% talked about going to their parents. So teens do want to go to parents, and they do want to go to adults and talk about it. They want to share what's going on, but they simply don't think that adults know how to handle it properly, and they're afraid that it could make the situation worse. So we do need to be a bit more aware about that. And so now I think...
Before we go there, Danielle, I'm wondering if maybe you're kind of addressing one of the questions there.
Sure.
It's Van talking. And the question reads, do you know how different the rate of spending time with other kids in person is compared to the same 10 or 20 years ago?
So it is approximately the same. Like, we're not seeing huge differences in how much time they're spending with kids in person, but it's what are they doing with their friends when they're together. So a lot of times they may be hanging out together in person, but still looking at screens. So it's not so much whether they are or are not, but what are they doing. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and so now I'll pass it to Laurel, who's going to talk a little bit about children and youth voices.
Thank you, Danielle. Yeah, so some of the things or worries that we hear from children and youth here at the clinic is that children and youth feel that parents or caregivers don't understand and that being online is a necessity. So we do have a couple of things that we've heard from them, and you can go ahead and select on the poll if you've heard these things from your children at home or your youth. So one is that I have to use social media so that I fit in with others at my school. So noticing that other people are using different apps and different ways, programs online that other kids are using, so they feel like they have to use it to ensure that they're similar and connecting with their friends as well. Sometimes we also hear that they wish they didn't have to respond so quickly without getting their friends mad at them. So just noticing that their friends will be messaging them a lot and that they feel that they have to respond or that it's going to cause a conflict between their friends. We often hear that it could be misinterpreted communication as well, and wishing that didn't happen when using social media. Other times we hear from the younger ones is that they just want to play the game. They don't want to be using any kind of social media on there, connecting with people, that they want to be able to just utilize having fun on there, and that sometimes there are components on the game that allow them to communicate between one another. Other ones that we hear is that they enjoy being online and having their own time, so outside of their family, just having some space to themselves. And again, as Dr. DeVaugh or Danielle mentioned, that having that sense of identity and sense of self is something that they like to explore and have that own time for themselves. And then also that having access to online is a big support for them. So we hear from a lot of children and youth that having that component to being able to go online and reach out to friends and having that 24 access, as Danielle mentioned before as well, is really important to them. Yeah, and so then in hearing some of their worries, so children and youth are worried that their phone or tablet will be taken away from them, that there's no way of staying in touch with their peers if that does happen as well, or if they're not able to access social media, that their caregivers won't understand why they're online as well, or what's going on behind being online and their communication with friends, and that they'll be punished for what another person has done. So what we hear a lot too is that if somebody's bullying them online, that they'll be punished by getting their tablet taken away, and then it starts that cycle again of their worry of their phone being or tablet being taken away, and it just solidifies that, solidifies the worry. So one thing that we hear is that if I tell an adult or my parent or caregiver that they won't let me go on my tablet anymore and they'll get mad at me. So there's that fear again that if they talk about cyberbullying to the adult, that they'll have their tablet taken away. And that by disengaging in online chats, that they'll also be targeted. So again, just reiterating what Dr. Law mentioned, that if they're not engaging on online or social media programs, that they'll be targeted at school, in person, or again online for not fitting in or being a part. So they could get bullied outside. So we'll pass it over to, oh, sorry. So yeah. So looking at some of the caregivers' voices that we've heard, caregivers, and you can again engage here in this poll if it's something that you also about, you feel the thought that you have. So caregivers are mentioned that they're worried about cyberbullying, which is great that you're logging on here and looking at this video if that's something that you are worried about. They're worried around their child being influenced or pressured to engage in sexting, influenced to engage in harmful behaviors towards themselves or other people, or in regards to sharing personal information, which comes up quite often. So just worried about even sharing where they live, what schools they go to. Some things we hear them saying is that they want them to be safe, that they notice the impact on their emotional and mental health after engaging in social media or being online. They don't like what other people are saying to them. That's a really big thing too that we hear from parents, especially when they're monitoring social media use. So if they're also logged on or have contact with their passwords, that they're able to log on and see kind of conversations. So they don't like what's happening there, and that they feel that social media takes up all of their free time. So I'm sure there's some people out there that agree with that too. I'm seeing about like 75% is that they're worried that they're on their phone all the time or they're on their tablets all the time and they're not engaging in any other curriculars or any other things outside of the phone or electronics. Yeah. So I'll pass this back over to Danielle.
All right. Thank you, Laurel. So yeah, we can see that parents have a lot of concerns and caregivers have a lot of concerns, understandably, about what to do to help them protect their children. And some of the questions here that are coming in have to do with what can we do to best support our kids and to talk to them a little bit more about these kinds of things. So one thing is that some parents are interested in installing monitoring software, or they might restrict or control technology use or take devices away if their children are experiencing bullying. Unfortunately, as well-intentioned as this may be, we found that this is not the best way to support children and to ensure their safety. So repeatedly, research is showing that these methods are usually temporary, and there's a missed opportunity for children and youth to learn about responsibilities because they're no longer engaging in a dialogue with their parent about responsible use. And so they may just go to their friend's house and go do these things, or when they go to university and there's no one watching over them, they just do whatever they want because they haven't been taught about responsible use. And so restricting and controlling and monitoring and taking devices away also breaks trust and reduces the chances that children and youth will tell caregivers that something is wrong because they're afraid that they will be punished. So that's something that we want to keep in mind and try not to do. So an approach that, or some approaches that caregivers can do will be shared by Val.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yes, so just kind of moving forward around, what are some things that that as caregivers we can do to help support the kids and youth? I know that there's a number of questions that people have posted, and we'll hopefully get to them. If we don't answer them through the slides, I'll make sure that we address those. So an approach that supports staying connected is to understand that bullying is a relationship problem, not a technology problem. And I think that that's really key, folks, because I think that the piece of when we talk about how do we support the children and youth, it also connects with our relationship with them. As we're kind of moving through the next couple of slides, I want you to kind of keep that in mind, that whatever the choices or responses or your reaction to your child or youth, how is that helping to keep you connected to your child? But one of the things that I find that is sort of a bit of a helpful filter for me, I've got 2 teen girls. I don't mind sharing that with folks, 15 and 16, and this is certainly a conversation that we have on a regular basis around their use of social media. So often one of the things that I have to kind of keep in mind as I'm also approaching that is to ask myself, by responding in this way, how is that keeping my connection with my child close together, or am I driving that apart? Because if I don't have a strong connection and or communication with my kids or with any child or youth, they're not going to have the opportunity to hear what I have to say. And in fact, they may not care with what we have to say if there's no relationship. Okay, so keep that in mind. Oh, I think this is Danielle's the stats.
So the key thing to remember is that you and your children are not alone in this struggle. So some parents say that they argue about devices. 36% of the time is on a daily basis. So this is not something that is unique. This is something that we're all kind of going through. Oops. So some of the sources of conflict is excessive use of digital devices. So screen time, for example, rules on how children use their devices, and what children are doing on their devices. So these are some of the things that there's a lot of conflict around.
All right, so back to them. So I think, again, one of the things to think about is remember that what your child is going through is a normal part of growing up. And it's really important to use the opportunity to establish common ground and understand. So in terms of caregiver tools for children between the ages of 5 and 12, structure and supervision is super important. Provide the level of structure and supervision that meets your child's individual need. I can't stress enough the importance of needing to collaborate with around setting the amount of time electronics are used. Involve your child in negotiating time limits. Giving them 10 minutes reminders when it's time for them to turn it off. Okay? We know that when we involve our child or youth in negotiating time limits, that they will have more buy-in, as opposed to us just sort of approaching and saying, this is what I expect you to do. And you might actually be surprised at some of the suggestions that they come up with. Sometimes I find, caregivers, and even with my own kids, they may come up with guidelines that are much stricter than what you would think would be, that you would even want for them, which surprises me, but this does happen. Let them know that this is not a consequence, but rather that you are taking your job to care for them very seriously. Eyes-on supervision helps children to feel safe and get into less trouble. So as the child grows and develops, and they are maturing into from a child to a tween to a teenager, reduce supervision as they are able to demonstrate safe internet use and self-control. Okay? And one of the things that I would mention, that if taking away electronics is a form of consequence that you are using, it's really important to be able to also negotiate when the electronics are going to be returned. And let your child know what it is that they need to do in order to earn it back. Because one of the sources, I think, adding to what you're saying, Danielle, that can be a source of conflict parents and kids is they don't know how they're going to earn the electronics back. And so then you might see actually an escalation of behavior or emotional issues that you may be able to avoid if there are clear expectations in terms of what it is that you're hoping for or what it is that you hope to see from the child. Okay? Creative consequences, I think I sort of alluded to, matching the consequence to the situation and behavior. Ensure that it makes sense to the child. The intensity of the reaction that we have to whatever it is that our child is doing, whether it be through use of electronics, whether it be appropriate or inappropriate, or any other behavior for that matter, will dictate in terms of their openness and wanting to have a discussion about the situation and or future situations that might happen. So not only be creative in matching the consequence to the situation, but also really making sure it's the intensity of our reaction. Instead of losing a privilege or grounding, try ways that they can make it up. You know your child best. If they are if they're getting into trouble for something they've done, I'm going to make up maybe not completing a chore. Does taking away their electronic match with what they're doing? Are there other ways that they can make up for missing the chore that makes sense to that particular situation? And again, be creative around that. You know your child best in sort of your home situation. Avoid isolating. Experiment with time in rather than time out. Okay? Essentially, what that's talking about is that sometimes we can be invited, I think, as caregivers to say, you know what, go to your room. And sometimes that can be super helpful. Having said that, really gauge and monitor, because for some children, when we ask them to go to their room, it can actually be more problematic in terms of the relationship. Some child or youth may experience that as being quite disconnecting. And what we might find, or what we sometimes hear from other caregivers, is that in fact they might see the behavior escalate as opposed to de-escalate. So here at Child and Adolescent Services, we often kind of talk about, does it make sense to do like a time out, or does it make sense to do a time in, depending on sort of what's happening with the child and also their history. If needed, make the time out brief, non-rejecting, and be available to your child during that time. Okay? If you're keeping it brief, I'm going to make up 15, 20 minutes. At that time, you may want to check in just to kind of see how they're doing. And or be very specific when you give them a timeout, how long the timeout is for, and what your hope and expectation in how you're going to reconnect with them afterwards in order to have the conversation. Okay? Because again, folks, one of the things that I really appreciate in working with kids and families here is that when things are not going well, this is an opportunity, folks. This is an opportunity for us to be able to renegotiate and develop an understanding of what may be going on. Okay? And together figure out what's going to be the most helpful in growing your relationship with your children. The last piece here is grounded from devices, spend positive time together, or offer an alternative activity. And I think that that's really key. One of the questions here talks about, I believe I read earlier, I believe the question was, how do you kind of help your kids find a balance in terms of their time on electronics and also of doing other activities? And that's a tough go, folks. It's one of those things where we can say to kids, get off your electronics. Like, are you serious? Like, what are you doing? And yet we're really not giving them an alternative or an opportunity as to what they can do. And so I think that if we are having the experience that they're being on there too much, then the conversation could also be, what else could we as a family be doing to kind of fill up that time, right? Does that make sense to you folks? Yeah, just kind of the idea around, if we're taking something away, what are we offering to our kids in filling that space, right? And I would say, in terms of the piece around creative consequences and or even matching the consequences, collaborating with your kids is have them help you to come up with ideas in terms of other things that they could be doing as well, right? All right. For kids between the ages of 12 and 18, I would say open communication is important for all ages, okay? Particularly with older kids, we need to listen openly without judgment. And I know this is hard for us to do as caregivers, right? Because we might see in some of the examples I think that Danielle had shared around, and also Laurel had talked about in terms of concerns and worries that caregivers have, that it makes sense that we may feel quite anxious and worried about what's going on with our children. And so I think when that happens, we get invited into wanting to fix, wanting to make things better for our kids. And in fact, if we rush too quickly to fix before we even hear what it is that may be impacting them, that's going to be problematic. Because what will end up happening is that if we get it wrong, folks, they'll shut down and they won't remain open to the conversation. Engage in positive dialogue without demanding to know everything that they are doing. Respect their privacy. This helps to reduce pressure on youth, so they will come to you when they are in trouble, as will minimize their worry that you will freak out. Talk about content they may encounter. Hypothetically, I'm just kind of wondering, do you ever run into situations like this, as opposed to, you must be doing this. I heard that so-and-so is doing that, so you must be doing it, right? Practice active listening. Listen to your youth. Let them finish venting or talking about what may be going on. Encourage dialogue. Acknowledge and express understanding about their emotional experience. This is what is also referred to as empathy. And some sample sentence starters that you can use to demonstrate that you are actively listening to your child could be, it seems like you feel really frustrated when you are texting your friend and they leave you on read, right? I think that's a big thing. Yeah, my teens say that. I can't believe they left me on read, right? Yes, that's very frustrating for them. So being able to hear that and help them identify the way that they might feel. Model labeling emotions. I notice that I'm feeling ... whatever it is that we're feeling when you shared about how difficult things are for you. Okay? The other piece I think that's worth mentioning in terms of the modeling piece, and I go back to what Danielle was saying earlier, and that is I think one of the things that Danielle has said is that the amount of screen time that a child uses sort of may reflect how much parents are using screen time. And so I would kind of echo that in saying that we have a lot of power, folks, in terms of what we do and how we model through our behavior, right? Do we carry our phones to bed? Is our phone in our bedroom? Does our child or youth see us searching on the web all night? Do we have our phones at the dinner table? Do we have it when we're driving and we're not really engaging and connecting with our kids and they see it strapped to our side? Our kids see this. And so not only do we sort of model those behavior, we can also model in terms of good limit setting and boundary setting for ourselves. And trust me that if we're asking our kids, regardless of how old they are, and yet we're not doing that, you'll hear about it, right? They'll say, well, you should be turning off your phone at the dinner table because we're not allowed to have it. This certainly happens, I think, right? Okay. Other things to think about, and this may address sort of one of the questions that you had around how do you approach sort of the topic of cyberbullying or of internet use with your kids, and or what if they don't want you to be a friend on their social media? Because I think that's a really legitimate question. Is try to allow them to exercise some independence. Too much monitoring or controlling may lead to more risky behaviors online. And again, folks, just kind of talking about the importance of keeping that channel of communication open. You can only be as helpful and as supportive to your kids if you know what's going on. And if there's no communication from them and them feeling comfortable at sharing that with you, you're not going to be able to be helpful. And discuss consequences of posting pictures and photos on social media openly. Certainly, when things have happened, I think that we can also talk about that when they may have posted inappropriate content and or pictures. That also gives an opportunity, albeit, parents and kids are mortified at the outcome. It also gives an opportunity to be able to negotiate and to be able to support your kids in the new learning of what happens, right? Family media plan, I think that this is really crucial. Come up with a plan and set rules together. And I'm going to emphasize that this is for the entire family, not just for the child or for the youth. If there is an app that your child uses or wants to use, perhaps one of the things that you can do is ask them to research and or provide reasons why they should have it. These are really good practices for kids in terms of the skills of negotiating. And I can tell you, my kids are really good at negotiating, right? This allows them to feel included and responsible, as well as feel that you are involved in a caring and positive way. Okay? All right, let's see. What else do we have here? Oh, we're almost at the end. Before I pass it back to Danielle to kind of wrap up with just the importance of working together with school and communities and also summarizing some of the key points, I just want to make sure that we've kind of answered some of the other questions that you've had. I was kind of jotting down some stuff. I think reiterating what I think is important around that we have the opportunity to model the behavior that we want our kids. It's amazing how sometimes we can set expectations for our kids that even we can't hold. So I think that it's important that as caregivers, we keep that in mind, right? As well, I think involving kids in planning activities. If we are wanting them to do more of other things besides being on screen time, then include them, invite them, offer other activities for them to do, as opposed to just saying, get off your screen time, find other things to do. Because again, they may not know, what sort of things. Before I sort of hand things over to Danielle, looking at some of the questions, answers, and whatnot, some of the concerns that folks posted were worries around exposure to inappropriate internet use, as well as in terms of boundaries. And I think that would be boundaries around the child's ability to know what websites to go on or not, as well as what they post or not. And I think just kind of going back to some of the things that we've already reiterated, that we've already spoken about, and that is keeping that channels of communication open and having those conversations with your children. And again, keeping in mind the age and developmentally that for a younger child, you may be much more involved in terms of setting parameters around what websites they can go on or not. As the children grow older and they're in 15, 16, 17, then really talking with them around what may be appropriate or inappropriate. And I find that often is helpful. Again, going back to the key piece, folks, is that we can't help children to behave or make better choices by making them feel worse about themselves. And so one of the things that we do not want to do in these situations is to, how would I put this? Well, I mean, essentially, we don't want them to feel that they're a bad person because they may be accidentally or things they may have made a poor choice, and rather see it as an opportunity for them to learn and to grow. And one of the things I know that in sort of having this discussion and thinking about some of the different strategies, that these are strategies, folks, that you can use to address any type of behavior, not just in terms of internet use, I would say. Thanks. Danielle, wrapping us up.
Yeah. So thank you, Ben. That's extremely informative, and I just love that we can all work together. And I think this is basically the concept that we're one of the concepts we're trying to convey is that we're all in this together. That even though it's happening online, we can think back to things that we may have struggled with when we were growing up, and a lot of it is very similar to the things that they are also struggling with. And so we're working together here. We want to work with parents and we work with schools to try and create safe environments for children to share their concerns and have that reciprocal relationship so that they can feel comfortable sharing what's going on. And if they are in trouble, they will know that they won't get in trouble for sharing what's going on in their lives. Um, as Ben had mentioned, it's important for us to develop a plan for our students and for our youth so that we can have deeper conversations about their struggles and to stay consistent. One website that's extremely informative about for schools and parents and youth to visit is prevnet.ca, and there's going to be a link at the end to that if you have any more information. And there's resources on there for teachers and parents for how to start conversations and activities that you can practice in class. And if things get very serious online, you may want to talk to a principal or a police officer, depending on what's going on. One question that has come in about how we can best support our kids after cyberbullying or a negative online interaction has happened is that we really want to be sure we're listening. And Ben mentioned before that we need to make sure that kids feel heard and give them a chance to vent without any interruption and without any judgment, and just have them say what they need to say and not shame them or make them feel bad that this is happening to them, but simply listen to it and then try and come up with a plan that will work for both your child and also solve the problem. Oftentimes, one of the comments that came up with these is they don't think parents or caregivers will understand what's going on, and oftentimes caregivers are concerned and just jump in and do something that they think is right but is not very appropriate for that age level, and socially it won't be healthy for them. And so we want to make sure that we come up with a plan with our children, and if things get very serious, to actually print off everything that's going on online, take screenshots of what's happening and bring it to the principal or bring it to the police officer if it's very serious, just so that you have the proof that that's going on. And hopefully we can all work together to resolve that. So in summary, using the internet does not cause mental health issues, but they can contribute to these factors if teens are already sensitive to it, or if teens are going online to feel better about themselves. So we really have to think about why they're going online. Cyberbullying is a relationship issue, not a technology issue. It's very hard sometimes to keep up with everything that's happening. So just try and remember that this is something that we've all kind of experienced at some point, whether as a perpetrator or whether we've seen it before or been harmed ourselves. So thinking about it more in terms of relationships and how we can heal these relationships. We want to try and foster open dialogue with our children that encourages them to want to share, to come up with a family media plan, not a child media plan, and set rules together as a family so that everyone can model responsible use together, and also discuss the consequences of posting pictures and photos on social media with your teens and what that could mean for them in the future. So we're really grateful that we can share this work with all of you and try and create caring and respectful and supportive communities together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much, Danielle and Van and Laurel. That was amazing. The amount of information you shared was just right, but so it was so connected to the research and useful things, and really captured what. For me and my family feels like our everyday experience. So very much appreciated the summary at the end as well. So thank you so much. Lots to remember there, and I'm glad we've got this recording that'll be posted online, and we'll make sure to send a follow-up email, the link to that, to all our participants tonight. And many thanks as well, of course, to all your colleagues and for supporting the session as well. And we certainly hope to work again not too far into the future. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.